How do you define a bedroom?
Michaela, I have great news and I have horrible news.
I'll have clients that say, I want to go buy 5 properties.
You have to ask yourself that question.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Tailored Wealth, where we provide general financial knowledge you never learned in school. In my 10 years as a financial advisor, I've noticed that when it comes to financial education, women are always an afterthought. My intention with this podcast is to create a space tailored to women as they navigate choices throughout their lives. And who better to have on than one of my favorite women and business owners and just overall incredible women, Michaela Morenz. Michaela, thank you so much for coming on today.
Taylor, thanks for having me. I can't think of anywhere I'd want to be on a Friday afternoon.
Oh, I appreciate it. So the way I would intro you, and I want you to intro yourself, but this is how I see you, because I was thinking about it as you were coming on. I feel like real estate is a lot of noise, right? And a lot of it's really good noise. It's chaotic. There's so much of it. People are fascinated by real estate, right? Nobody's looking at mutual funds. Like, they're not exactly the sexiest things you could be looking at, but houses, people care. And the way I would describe you is throughout all the noise, you are the calm confidence in real estate. So I'm so excited to have you on as our real estate expert today.
I appreciate you saying that, because I think that I can walk into a restaurant, any place, and my ear always picks on that one person in the far corner that's talking about homes or the real estate values, or for some reason I always pick that up. And I know that's not just me. I think it's a common conversation for everybody, regardless of the economy, regardless of the time of year. It's on people's minds. But I appreciate you saying that. I think I do characterize myself as the person that is the last person that you think is freaking out if it's a time to freak out. Because I think when you deal with people that are buying and selling real estate, you're not just dealing with people that are buying and selling real estate. You're dealing with that mom who has kids that have gone off to college and there's a different feeling in the house. You're dealing with maybe that family who's bringing grandma in to live with them, so they need a little extra space. So there's other emotional things that are going on with that. So no matter what reason why someone is buying or selling a house, there's things that are happening in their lives, and most of the time they don't even see what's coming. And I do try to be that calm, just a confidant for them. But it's a crazy roller coaster out there. The reason I love and do what I do is because it's really the people. And when I always say, when you meet good people, you meet more good people. And that's kind of what's kept me in the business, is you meet a great family and they introduce you to another great family.
And I want to touch on that because you are just an incredible entrepreneur, businesswoman. So talk to us a little bit about your journey to owning your own business, getting into real estate. How did this all happen?
Well, I like to say that I got into real estate when I bought my first home at 24. I was 24 when I bought my first house, and in college, I was on the track to become a doctor. And I was pre-med. I was a biology major. And at the very end of college, I just, had this feeling that I didn't really like science. I loved the people, but I had a horrible experience in a cadaver lab where I just kind of froze because the cadaver actually had her nail polish on. And I was like, this is not the part of medicine I was signing up for,
Fair, yeah.
So I kind of had to figure out what I was going to do with that. And my best friend at the time, he called me and said, Michaela, I have great news and I have horrible news. What do you want to hear first? And I said, well, give me the good news. And he said, I'm starting at Harvard Law School, or at Harvard Medical School today. And first generation going to medical school at Harvard. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. He said, do you want to know the bad news? I said, yeah, lay it on me. He said, as of today, I'm over $250,000 in debt.
Wow.
And so when I'm, 22, 23 at the time, I'm thinking, man, that's not the road I want to go down. I don't want all of that debt. So what else can I do? And I ended up, instead of going into debt for my school, I went into debt buying my first home. And
I love that.
yeah,
Cool.
And at that moment I got hooked because I realized it was an investment, and I immediately took on two friends who were renters of mine that ended up basically paying my entire mortgage. And I was like, if I can make an investment like this and have my friends who I enjoy living with pay my mortgage, what are the other possibilities, you know? And so that really started my real estate journey was then. But fast forward, I moved to Florida 15 years ago, and I felt that was a brand new start for me, and I could just really write my own script. I think I moved here on a Friday, and on Monday morning I was in real estate school.
Wow.
So I wasted no time in getting licensed. It was a horrible time to start my own business in real estate because it was all short sales and foreclosures at the time. So it was a slow start, but 15 years later, I'm still here. So
that's incredible. What advice would you give somebody that's maybe looking to start a career in real estate?
What I always tell first-time prospects for realtor to become a realtor is be prepared for that first year to work 80 hours a week and make no money. Like, prepare yourself for that. You can't go into this industry and think that all of a sudden, just because you're licensed, the money is going to roll in. Mm-hmm. You have to, I think, give yourself at least a year. And that's what I did for myself. I was like, I'm going to give myself 1 year. I'm going to lay it all out on the table. I'm not going to give myself any excuses. If I have to work 80 hours a week, that's what I'm going to do. And at the end of the year, if I feel that I was successful in building something, it wasn't a dollar amount that I gave myself, but I felt if I was successful at the end of the year in building something and I saw momentum coming, then I would give it another year. So I would say, unless you're going to be full-time, all in, give yourself 100% to the craft, don't consider it, because you will waste a year. You will be frustrated, and I think you'll frustrate your clients along the way if they feel that you're not, going to be fully invested for a certain length of time. As far as investing, though, I think every one of us who buys our first house is a real estate investor. So if you have a house over your head, that's an investment. Even if you're getting homestead, even if that's your primary residence, I feel like that makes you an investor. I think where you can start using investing in real estate to your advantage is when you start thinking, okay, this house is maybe a little small for me, or maybe I always tell myself I want that big girl kitchen or the big girl master closet or something. I'm upgrading, right? So once you start having those thoughts, I feel like that is the easiest way to go from home ownership to diving deeper into your real estate investment. If you can qualify to buy a house and not sell your old one, keep the old house, rent out the old house, let someone else make that mortgage payment, let someone else pay those taxes. And if you're not having to come out of pocket every month for anything related to that house, someone else is making those payments, they're paying it off, 20, 25 years down the road, here you have a house free and clear, and you didn't do anything but put a tenant in there.
As we were talking, and I use a lot of different symbolism and all of that. As you were talking, I was like, real estate and liquid securities investments, really the thought that comes to mind is that we each own one half of a fraternal twin. Real estate and investments, they're fraternal twins, I think. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that's the same. There's a couple things that are different. Some things I want to touch on that you said. In terms of education, I think that real estate and financial advising are similar in that they're test-based and they're a lot cheaper, frankly, than going to medical school or law school, where you've got to commit to 6-figure debt if you want to do something like that. But also with that lower barrier to entry, you want to be really mindful that you have somebody that is a realtor part or full-time and financial advisor that's full-time, right? Somebody that's making it into their career, because I always use that as a starting point with clients of when you're looking at realtors, find somebody, like you said, that does it full-time. If you're going to get into it, I appreciate you saying that, because I hear people all the time like, I'm going to go into real estate. And I'm like, and it's going to be my side hustle. right? And to those people, I just always say, well, it's a full-time job and the market's always changing.
Yeah, I was out on vacation somewhere recently and was talking to a realtor, and she was from Florida. We were talking about the Florida contract, and she was talking about things in this contract. And she was like, "Can you believe that's in there?" I'm like, "Why don't you know that it's in there?" She said, "Well, I don't do this full time. I just do it to help my friends and my family members." And I'm like, if you don't know the contract, which is what I would say basic 101 real estate, if you don't know the contract, can you really help your friends and family because you're only doing it part-time? And I love, people that do try to do real estate part-time, because I think that their goals are usually very pure. They want a little extra money for their family, especially during down times. But I think when you're looking to hire someone, like, you want someone who is daily invested in that craft, who sees not just like the typical run-of-the-mill contract that comes through. You want the one that's seen all the one-offs. I love to say that, like, the day that I stop learning something in real estate is the day I really need to get out of real estate, because that's what's so, I think, enjoyable for me, is that I learn something new every day. And when I learn something new every day, I really try my best to retain it so that it doesn't just help that client that I'm working with, but it helps me help the future clients that I'm working with. And I think when you work with someone who's full-time, that's what you get. You get someone who's a little bit better equipped to help you navigate what's coming around the corner that you can't see yet.
And I think too, really well said. And I think part of that fraternal twin piece, right, is that houses are emotional just like money is, right? And money obviously plays a big part in real estate. And the other piece of it is that, I always tell clients, make your money work harder than you work. And you touched on a couple of really intriguing different ways. Number one, the basic thing is just buy the place where you're living, because all you have to do is enjoy it, and it's going to go ahead and hopefully appreciate. Historically, real estate appreciates over time. And then if you can go to that step 2 of having a rental property, how amazing is that, where you have somebody else paying down your investment? And again, the one thing we can't control is time. We can never make more of it, right? And so letting that time pass, where all of a sudden you've got this investment that's paying for itself. And it's interesting too, because those time frames a lot of times will set you up really nicely for 20 years. Feels like a long time till you're looking at your retirement runway or something like that. So long-term investing in real estate, I think, is a really interesting idea. And that's why I always tell clients that I work with, it's not an either or, right? And what I always say is, when people say, I want to get into real estate investing, my question is, how much time do you want to put into it, right? And if the answer is not a lot, my question always is, well, then is there enough margin for you to budget in a property manager? If there's not, then all of a sudden that might be where you want to look at more like securities investments, right? But to your point, especially over the last couple of years, real estate has really appreciated significantly in value, right? So just kind of, I'm curious, when you're talking to people about that want to go from that homeowner to that investor, what is that checklist you kind of walk through with them?
Yeah. So I'm a single woman, right? I've been single for 10 years
girl.
now. Yeah.
Yep.
And, I think that as a single woman, you do everything on your own, right? If you're wise, you have good counsel. You talk to Taylor, you talk to, to me, you talk to the people in your life that really have 1,000% your best interest at heart, right? Even when it comes to your finances. And so I think that one of the things that I love about, starting out in investing, especially in real estate, is that if you actually make that first purchase to live in, you decide to live in that investment, you can get into that house for as little as 3.5% down. Very little cash outflow for you in that case. The lowest that you'll ever get. Because if you end up just buying a regular straight up investment property, you need to have at least 20 to 30%, which is a huge swing, right? So if you're saying, hey, I want to get started in this and I don't have, endless cash available. A great place to start would be with that 3.5% down, moving into that property, planning on living there for at least 2 years, doing renovations that you know are not just for you, but are smart. They're smart for resale. They're smart for you to, putting in that kitchen, doing the bathroom, adding a little bit of square footage, trying to figure out if you can get a third bedroom out of the place. Little things like that you could do in 2 years that are going to, number one, either turn a profit for you if you decide that you're going to sell that property and upscale for yourself if there's equity there. Or better yet, turn that property into an investment property. Find a renter. I always say that the best house to rent is the one that you've lived in. Because
I love that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know the inner workings of that house. You know the tricks of the trade of that home. You don't have to rely on, a plumber or an electrician to come out and charge you $100 an hour to tell you, oh, you have to have that switch on and that switch on if this is an electrical problem. Like all these little things, these nuances that you know about your house, you don't have to call someone for because you lived there. I think that's the best place to start. And because you're familiar with the house, you can also find a great person to rent that house that you feel that, will be there a year, 2 years. And don't be afraid to raise the rent on them. Don't be afraid to give yourself a raise every 2 or 3 years. If they're great renters, try to keep them. Mm-hmm. But don't be afraid to raise the rent and give yourself a raise.
This is where I want to plug in a little bit of the financial advising piece that I tell people. When you say 2 years, something really important, a fun fact to know, is that if you own a home as your primary residence for 2 of the last 5 years, as a single person, you can exclude $250,000 worth of capital gains. What that means is if you bought a house for $200,000 and you sell it 3 years later for $450,000, the tax you pay is $0. If you're married, that number jumps up from $250,000 you can exclude to $500,000. So you can actually exclude $500,000 of appreciation on that property without paying any tax at all. And the thing that I touch on with clients, especially as they're dipping their toes into real estate investing, is 2 years flies by in a minute. Mm-hmm. And the nice thing about it is there are so many benefits to having it mortgaged as your primary residence. And if you decide to rent it out in 2 years, you don't have your mortgage broker knocking on your door going, hey, wait a second, now this is an investment property. Mm-hmm. You get to lock in that rate as a primary residence. You can rent it out, and then you can go ahead and buy something else, to your point, with that advantaged rate, and you can build up your portfolio mm-hmm. pretty quickly. Because people say, I want to go, I'll have clients that say, I want to go buy 5 properties. I'm like, let's start with 1. Yeah. Let's make sure you like it. In worst case, if you don't like having a tenant, well, if it's 2 of the last 5 years, you can have somebody live there for 2 years, have somebody else pay down your mortgage, hopefully make a little money on top of it, go to sell it. And as long as you don't have an appreciation value more than $250,000, you're not going to pay any taxes. Mm-hmm. And if you do more than $250,000, great news, you made more money. And also it's at a long-term capital gains rate, which is favorable on your tax return. Mm-hmm. So that's what I tell people as kind of a jumping off point. And the other thing is, I think it's important, and I'm curious your take on this. What's the balance when you're looking to buy? Because a home is a sentimental purchase. But if we have this idea in the back of our head for it to be an investment one day, how do you balance those 2 thoughts? Because sometimes I feel like they can be conflicting.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's hard when you are looking to make this house, or even the shell of a house, if you buy one, into your home, and then think about what it will do for resale. It's the hardest part for everybody, because the heart knows what the heart wants mm-hmm. so many times. But I think that if you are thinking about buying a home to eventually become that investment property, sticking to the things that we know mm-hmm. To be of good value and good resale, 3-bedroom over 2-bedroom. If you can somehow find a way to make that 2-bedroom house a 3-bedroom house over time, do it.
How do you define a bedroom? Does it have to have a closet?
So a bedroom is always a window and a closet.
So these people that buy a 2-bedroom with a den, are we trying to put in a window and a closet to make it a 3-bedroom? Is that an example of something you could do?
Exactly. Any additional square footage in that house that you could eventually turn into, it doesn't even have to be a big closet. I've seen people put in, what looks like a stack of shelves with drywall around it, and that's a closet. So
You're like, you're welcome, Zillow.
Yeah.
It's a bedroom now. Okay, got it.
So as long as you have the bedroom that has a closet and a window, you're good. A lot of people through COVID found themselves needing that extra bonus room for office space because they started working from home. And so people got really creative on how to even turn in like a dining room into an enclosed space with maybe some French doors and a closet that still opens up onto your living room, but now we can call that a bedroom. And
Okay, so French doors, it doesn't matter if they're French doors or if it's just a single typical bedroom door.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
as long as it has a closet and a window, you're good. But sticking to, trying to stay in areas where, number one, you want to live. There's a couple areas around us that I've always thought, man, I would love to go invest in that area because you can get a home for half of the area that I want to live in. But at the end of the day, if you don't want to live in that area, then do you want to become a landlord in that area? You have to ask yourself that question. So asking yourself the question, where do I want to live? Where do I feel safe living? Especially if you're a single woman. Where do I feel safe? And then where am I going to feel safe performing work on that house if I have a tenant in place and they call me, at 9:00 on a Friday night? Am I going to be safe going there? Sticking to kind of some of those basics, I think, helps you make wiser investments. I always think too, in Florida, you are best to stick with a block home instead of a wood frame home. You're also best to kind of stick with a home that is newer construction. That's harder in our area. But not only the insurance costs, but just the ongoing maintenance costs are going to be a fraction of what they would cost if you were to buy a much older home.
And then what about a condo or a townhouse versus brick and mortar single family home?
What I always tell people is you're not going to really pay attention to the purchase price. Once you get the keys in hand, you're not going to think one moment about that dollar amount that was on that sales contract. You're going to think, what is my monthly mortgage payment going to be?
Yes, that's so true. Everybody worries about their monthly payment. Yep.
So if you think about that monthly payment, sometimes that does keep you in a condo. But then you also have to factor in the HOA fees. You're paying, less for utilities and less for some of those, ancillary products like, your internet and your cable, the community pool if it has one. But for the most part, if you are okay with that mortgage payment with that HOA fee, then I would pay attention more to what are your monthly payments looking like. If your monthly payments require you to stick in a condo or stay in a townhome, no problem. Just make sure that if you're in a condo or if you're in a townhome and there's an HOA, that there's no rental restrictions, so that when you do decide that that home is not going to be where you come home every night and make your dinner, that you'll be able to rent it without any, restrictions or, sometimes HOAs will put a cap on the number of rentals that can actually be operating in that association.
And where do you find that information?
A great place would be your realtor if you have a good one, because they will be able to give you all the rules, the regulations, the rental stipulations. But most of the time now, a lot of the homeowners associations, they will actually post their rules and regulations on their website. Sometimes they're also recorded in public record.
Very helpful. And I think, and I want to kind of segue into this. So I also have advice, and you touched on this, that's tailored to single women when they're looking to purchase a property. For myself, I'm in a condo. Would I love to be in a house? Absolutely. But when I asked myself, not only how handy am I, which the answer is not really at all, I had to ask myself, do I feel comfortable if something breaks having a guy I don't know in my house, right? Or really looking at, I'm a single income. If there is a really expensive issue on a house is just me, myself, and I, right? Trying to make those payments and cover that. But it was also a matter of, to your point, when you said we do everything ourselves, we do. So it's like when I come home from work on a Saturday, am I really going to want to go like weed whack? Not really. So it's one of those things where I pay a premium, I pay an HOA, so that way I don't have to do those things. Is it necessarily what I would want to do long term? Maybe, maybe not. But I have that advice that is more specific to single women. And you touched on this as well, and I wanted to circle back. It's great to buy in up and coming areas or areas that are in the process of being gentrified. But sometimes as a single woman, that's not realistic, right? It's like, but the one stipulation is you have to be home before it gets dark. It's like, well, I can't live my life where I'm only coming home before it gets dark. So I think that in some ways, even without people saying, oh, women have the same exact opportunities as men have, it's like, that's an example sometimes where I go, yeah, except for your MVP, I call it, your most valuable purchase. Sometimes you're restricted on the people you're letting in your house, where that house is located, things that can really appreciate more in value. If you go into those up and coming neighborhoods early, you have more appreciation potential, especially in an area like the area we live in where things have gotten so expensive in Florida. That's just one of those areas where I like to point out when people go, oh, well, everybody's the same. It's like, not necessarily all the time though. And that's something that I really wanted to touch on with this podcast is I feel like everywhere I go as a single woman, I always have my guard up a little bit more than I would if I had a partner. And I'm sure you feel a similar way. So when you're looking to make your biggest purchase, what are the things you need to be asking when you're looking for your realtor who's really going to be like your quarterback on your purchase, right? What do you look for? What should people be asking? Talk to us a little bit about that.
The most important part of this journey, I think, is that you enjoy the person that you're doing it with. I mean, when I calculate the number of hours sometimes that I spend with certain clients, I mean, you're talking to them in the middle of their son's football game. You're talking to them sometimes at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And if you, for any reason, look at your phone and there's any fear or any dislike that comes across your mind when looking at that person's name, like they're probably not the person you're going to want to be talking to for the next 3 months, if not more. So I think that the number one thing is this is a stressful transaction. Sometimes it can be a roller coaster, but really doing it with someone that you enjoy, just not only their presence and their personality, but also their professionalism. That would be number one. Number two, I think that it's really important to know that that person is available when you're available, because that's more of a procedural thing. If you have an agent who doesn't work at all on weekends, but you're only off on weekends, that's pretty critical. I know for me, I always try to be flexible to whoever I'm working with, so I always tell people I work on nights and I work on weekends and I'll even work during the week. I really, I do carve out time in my own personal schedule for myself. But if I know that I am going to be working with someone for the next 3 months who only has Mondays and Wednesdays off, I'm making sure that those Mondays and Wednesdays are available for them. And so I think that's a really key question just to be asking your realtor. I think the other thing to ask them too is like, are they really someone who has your best interest at heart? I mean, I always say, don't hire me just to become your real estate agent this time. Hire me to become that friend that wants to go to the weddings and wants to go to the funerals and, wants to kind of become a part of your family's life. Because I think when you have that kind of relationship, everybody makes better decisions for themselves and they're open to a different type of guidance. I just had an appointment this morning with a girlfriend, single woman, and she was wanting to sell her home. She didn't flood during any of the storms or anything like that, but she said, hey, my luck is running out. And I just feel like now is the time for me to maybe move to higher ground. And as we were sitting there talking, I was like, why don't you rent the place? You can afford to buy one. Like, keep this as a rental, generate some income, and then just go buy a new place. Then you have, source of passive income coming in. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'd always thought about that, but nobody's ever encouraged me to do that. She said, you're the last person that I would have thought would be telling me to keep this house and rent it. And that just, to me, that made me feel so good, because I feel like you should be working with someone, whether you've known them 5 years or 5 minutes, that is going to have your best interest at heart.
I think that's fantastic. And it's that long-term investment in your clients, right? And I do the same thing. And I always tell people that your wealth is different than managing your money. Your wealth is similar to what you're doing with your clients, where it's your investments, it's your primary residence, it's optimizing the choices that you have and also modifying them over time as things change, because things always change, right? And so I really admire that about you, that you take a long-term approach with the clients that you work with, because to your point, it's one of those things where, are you going to collect the fee from them selling that house? No. But are the dividends of that goodwill of that person referring you to somebody else, and then you have another family that you're working with over time, when you build that kind of just really high quality business? I just want to commend you for that, because I think that's fantastic.
Thank you. I think that's what keeps you in the business, right? It's the, I can look at different people that I've come across, and I'm like, these are like my family now. They started off as clients, but now we're family. We've been through 3, 4, 5 moves at this point. And if you can get through a couple moves together, I think you have a chance for a long relationship.
There you go. Which, speaking of that, what about for the single ladies that become taken ladies, and all of a sudden they're buying with a partner? How does that conversation shift with those clients? And what advice do you give couples that are looking for a house?
This is where I really feel like you have to just lay out a lot of the facts with people. I do not recommend, and this is in no judgment on anybody, but I think unless you're married, you shouldn't be buying a house together.
Why?
Because stuff happens. It
Preach.
does.
Yep, it does.
It does not matter how in love and how perfect this person or this relationship is. I have unfortunately sold enough homes to people that if they did not have that wedding certificate, and I hate to say it that way, if you are going to be in a committed relationship where you're not going to be married, but you want to buy a house together, then you need to make the hard decision of who is buying the house and who is renting from that person.
Ooh.
You need to make that decision.
Do you help them decide that, or do you give them guiding questions?
I put it out there. I just put it out there and say, this is what I think you should be talking about. And I have a very, very good friend of mine who a couple years ago, and it wasn't my advice. She just, out of the, some sort of inner voice told her, hey, I'm buying this house with my boyfriend. We're probably going to get married. And she just had this feeling that he needed to be off of it. So in the middle of the contract, here we are taking him off the contract. And here we are 3 years later, and they're no longer an item. But what they decided, and this is the conversation that we had at that point, was, okay, you are now going to be the owner, and you're going to be collecting rent. And the partner then paid her, and it wasn't like a ton of money, but it was enough where she didn't feel like he was taking advantage. He didn't feel like, he had money going down the drain. Now, I think they had some other budgeting plans in place. They knew who was paying for what in other areas. But I think when you're looking to buy a house with someone, it is really scary, and it's really risky business if you're not married and you are not in some sort of long-term committed relationship. It's too risky.
Well, it's a contract. The contract stays, right? Regardless of if you break up or not, all of a sudden it's binding. That's what I love about you. You're like that quote where it's like, walk softly but carry a big stick. Like, I'm like, if I ever need someone to really bring down the hammer and have the conversation that needs to be had, I'm calling you. Yeah. And they won't even see you coming. And then it's like, all right, I guess we're going to talk about who's buying and who's renting. And I guess my follow-up to that is, what about the women who own a home or who don't own and their partner owns a home and they're looking to move in? What's the advice that you give? Is it the same if the man owns the house or the woman? Is it different?
Yeah, I'm also not a big fan of just moving in to move in. I mean, I think that if you're in a relationship, and this is just a personal, this is not a business thing. This is just a personal one-off for me.
It's a podcast, not a textbook. Tell me what you think. Yeah.
Yeah. I personally don't think that if you're just moving in to move in with someone, I don't think that most of the time, I think that's a solution to a financial problem. It's not a solution to a relationship problem or a relationship.
Oh man, that was good.
Yeah.
It's a solution to a financial problem, but not a relationship problem. Woof, okay.
Yeah. So unless someone is moving in with the intent that, we are getting married, we have a date set, like there is, the invitations have been sent out, the caterer has been
there's consideration.
There's
a ring, a caterer or something, deposit. There's a deposit that has been put down. Okay. Got it.
Exactly. I think that unless those things have happened, I think that you are there. And studies and statistics actually show that, individuals who live together do not have a more successful chance at having a successful relationship or marriage than if they don't live together before. So,
but if they're like, Michaela, I'm doing it, I'll tell you what I tell them, but I want to hear what you tell them.
So if they're doing it, then I just tell them you need to set yourself up for your own out, because I think so many times relationships go on and on and on because it's easier for them to continue the relationship than it is for them to break the lease. Or it's easier for them to continue the relationship than go find a new place to live where they have to put down first month, last month's security deposit. Mm-hmm. If they haven't made that decision yet, but they say, I'm doing this, then I try to say, like, at least know what your out is, mm-hmm. and stick to that out. But if you're just moving in with someone and you're paying them rent, I mean, that's your choice. I think that's like I said, it's an answer to a financial problem. It's not an answer to a relationship issue.
So good. What I tell people is you have to write it down and sign it. Mm-hmm. And if you can't have the conversation to write it down and by the way, you're not writing it down, hire a lawyer to write it down for you.
Great
where
advice.
You've got a contract that's being signed. Because if you can't work your way through that, mm-hmm. then you probably are going to have a tough time if it comes to move out and there's nothing that's signed. Same concept with getting married. It's like, if you can't talk about your finances now, then that's going to be a red flag moving down the road, because mm-hmm. these are realities, right? These are mm-hmm. things that you have to talk about. Mm-hmm. So that's what I always say is being in love is great, but being in love can be temporary. Being smart needs to be forever. Mm-hmm. And just make sure at the end of the day, you have yourself covered. By the way, not just if you're the homeowner, but if you're the person that's renting, making sure that there's a stipulation, like you can't just throw me out tomorrow if we break mm-hmm. up. I need 30 days to find a place or something like that that's written down, right? Mm-hmm. So it's protection on both ends. And I think that piece gets lost a little bit sometimes. And because there is a power dynamic when one person is the owner of the mm-hmm. home and one person's the renter, right? Mm-hmm. So I always try to approach those conversations where it's like, we're protecting both parties by doing this. This mm-hmm. isn't a punishment on the person that doesn't own the home. Right. This is something we're putting in place that's something that both parties have a say in mm-hmm. and they can set the terms of. And then once everybody agrees to it, we file it away. And if they live happily ever after, then it just collects dust in a drawer. And if they don't, then we've got a mm-hmm. blueprint for how to move forward, which I guess brings me to my next question for you, which is one of the tougher transactions I'm sure you deal with is when people are separating or going through divorce. So can mm-hmm. you walk me through what that process looks like for the clients that you work with?
Well, that one hits really close to home because I was obviously there at one point. And I think the first thing I always say is, most of the time when people are coming to me, they're kind of already at that point where they've decided we're selling the house. And I'm always blown away by the number of people that have already made all of these sort of non-divorce decisions, like selling the house and who gets this car and that boat. And like they've already made those decisions, but there hasn't been any formal divorce, mm-hmm. or formal separation signed. And so the first thing that I always ask is, have you both really done everything that you can do to save this marriage? Because There is nothing more painful, nothing more difficult than a relationship breakup of any kind, but especially a marriage, and especially one that involves children and assets and family members. So the first place I always start is, have you really done everything that you possibly could do so that you can tell your kids, hey, we did everything that we could do? And then once that happens, then I usually, ask them how they want to proceed with usually the sale of their home. Are they both going to have equal decision making power?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Or do they both have to be involved in all of the decisions? Or, just like in marriage, I deal with, a lot of people who are obviously still married, and there's usually one of the two that is your go-to. It doesn't matter if it's the husband or wife.
Is it normally who they tell you in the beginning you're going to go to? Or does it end up being the other person? Okay.
Yeah. You can usually tell by who sets up the appointment with you. Most of the time I will say that it is the female in the relationship, because they, want to feel comfortable with who's coming into their home. And typically they want someone that they know, like, and trust. So they get more of that. The second thing I think people should really talk about is who gets the homestead. A lot of divorcing couples don't even talk about that. And I think attorneys are, if attorneys are involved, they'll start that conversation. But especially for the family who's lived in that house for 15, 20 years or more, they have a lot of homestead portability stacked up in that marital home.
Can you clarify what you mean by homestead?
Homestead is your, in the state of Florida, is the property that's declared as your primary residence, and that you are receiving a tax deduction for, and certain protections as well, when you've claimed that property as your homestead property. It is not a property that you are generating investment income from in any way, or rental income, but it's your primary residence. And in the state of Florida, we have this provision that says that taxes will not increase more than 3% per year. And so even if let's say that you buy a house at $250,000 and in 1 year it goes up to $500,000, your taxes are not going to double. The homestead provision allows that it will only go up a maximum of 3% a year. So it keeps your taxes affordable, even if you see this huge increase in your property value. And so what a lot of people don't realize is that homestead gets accrued on a yearly basis. And so where that helps or benefits the divorcing party is who gets to take that with them when they sell the marital property. And let's say they both go on to purchase their own properties. In the divorce decree, you can say, I want 50% to go to the husband. I want 50% to go to the other partner. You can give it to one of the parties and not the other. But that turns out to be, one of those tax benefits that if you don't talk about that before you sell the house, and if that's not part of your agreement, then you could have one party whose taxes skyrocket after they make their next purchase, and the other person's could be, abysmally low. So I think that would be, one of the first things to talk about outside of, how you are going to divide the assets, is who's getting that homestead.
I love having conversations like this with different experts, because there are all these little things when you go to get divorced that feel little at the time. But then I always say the divorce decree is like your Bible. I mean, that's the blueprint for when you go back and you look at when you're restarting your life, it's based off of what that document says. And it's really expensive to change that document. And also your ex doesn't have to change it. If they're not going to be like, we'll give you half the homestead. Sorry, we overlooked that. Why would they do that? Right. So it's one of those things that a lot of the things we're talking about and these tips from different experts, you really want to bring everybody in, because that can be huge and something you don't realize until you get your next place and you look at your property tax bill and you try not to pass out because it's so high. So taking a look at your homestead. And the other thing is, a lot of this can be really overwhelming, trying to remember everything. And the good news is you don't have to. You just have to know those buzzwords to tell the experts you're working with. So even if you're not in the state of Florida and you're listening, it's something to bring up with your divorce attorney of, hey, what's going on with the homestead? Or making sure you have a realtor that's going to bring that up before you even have to. When you're talking to different people, are they being mindful of your property taxes? And so I appreciate that so much, because I feel like that's such a good tip that nobody thinks about or talks about. So I'll have clients a lot of times where that first year after a divorce, it's so overwhelming. There are so many changes, and a home purchase is a very stressful process. What do you advise people sometimes to rent for a year? Because sometimes, depending on the person, I'll go rent, see where you want to live, and then buy. Do you ever advise that? And if you do, what happens with that portion of the homestead? Do they lose it after a certain period of time?
You have, to answer that question directly, you have 18 months from the beginning of which that year was sold, of which that house was sold, to be able to take the homestead and port it over to the next property. So let's just say somebody gets a divorce. We're in November. We're in October right now. And so let's say somebody sells their home in October. They actually have 18 months from the beginning of that year. So the beginning of 2024, so January, you'd have 18 months from January 1, 2024 to be able to port over that homestead.
So that's not a lot of time at all.
Not a lot of time. So you kind of want to think about that, when you're going to sell your home, so that you have enough time to get in. So that kind of is a great segue into the other part of your question, is when you're talking to someone about, well, should they rent that first year? Should they buy something that first year? I'm with you. I think that the hardest thing to do when you've been through a divorce is all of a sudden making these, what seems like huge decisions. To me, I don't think the decision between buying and renting is a huge decision. I think decisions like closing your business, moving your kids to different schools, moving out of state, I think those are big decisions. A big decision is not deciding whether to rent or to buy. I think that becomes a financial decision. When you think about how much it costs to put a first month deposit last month when you're renting, sometimes to come up with that amount of cash is no different than coming up with a down payment on a home. And so when you factor in, how long do they have before they lose that homestead portability? If they have 18 months, then yeah, maybe and if they have some extra cash to burn, go ahead and rent for a year, because you have 18 months, to get the homestead ported over where you don't lose that. But if you're going to lose that portability, and you're also going to spend as much money to rent as you are going to put a down payment on a small house, and to me, I feel like that's a small financial decision to make. Because you can always resell that house. You could always rent that house. You're not going to be tied to that house. You're only going to be tied to the decisions that you make, as to whether or not you get those long-term decisions that you make.
And to your point, for me as an advisor, a lot of times the month of December is interesting, because I'm like, we could make a decision that if we put it off by 3 days, it could be a tax deferral for 16 months, right? Because if we sell in December, then it's going to be on your taxes come April. If we wait sometimes, like I said, 3 days, and we're in January of the following year, not only are you not getting taxed that year, but you have until April 15th of the following year. So that's where I get that 16 months from. And so I think that it's interesting in terms of when you're taking a look at the time frame to close, if you can, in your example of like October, if you're trying to push that closing date, whether it's January 1st or it's, February or March or whatever, if January 1st is that time and you can give yourself an extra, another 16 months, right? Why wouldn't you do that?
Why not?
Yeah, 100%. That's super interesting. What are we missing in terms of real estate? How long does from when you go under contract to the closing, it's typically 60 days, right?
You could do it in 30.
No? Okay.
So it can be fast or it can be slow. It just kind of depends on, the agreement between the buyer and seller and what they need. But I mean, if you're looking to make an investment or make a purchase, from the time you go under contract until the time you end up with the keys, you can reasonably expect 30 to 60 days. Kind of on the same track that we were talking about is, you know, a lot of people, when they select their closing date, try to close at the very beginning of the month. Because if you close at the beginning of the month, let's just say we're in October right now, we're at the end of October. And so if you put in a contract right now and you said, I want to close in 30 days, that puts you at the end of November. And if you close at the end of November, you won't have a full mortgage payment due in December. It will be due in January. But instead of closing, 30 days, if you extend it to say 40, 45 days, and you say, we want to close at the beginning of December, let's just postpone it like another 5 days. If you close at the beginning of December, then you won't have a full mortgage payment due in December. You won't have one due in January. Your first full mortgage payment will be due in February. So that's like, an extra 2 months where you're just buying yourself a little bit of time to transition. It frees up your cash flow a little bit, gives you a little bit of a breathing room where you don't have that, pressure that, oh my gosh, my first payment's coming up,
I just paid movers a couple grand. I just paid all these other things that I didn't realize I was going to have to pay.
Yeah. So if you're talking about from contract to close, it could be 30 days, but maybe instead of 30 days, maybe you could make it 32 days,
Smart.
and it might buy you a little bit of extra financial freedom for a couple months while you make the transition.
So in general, circling back to your real estate agent for tips like that on just being mindful of when your closing date is and being intentional about that. So don't just overlook it and pick, 60 days out, that's the day. Being mindful because it's not set in stone. And then also being mindful of if you're in that last quarter of the year, really taking a look at, does it benefit you to push out that closing till January of the following year? The end of the year, it's a little dicey in a good way, where it's like, if you have the right experts with you, you can make sure that you're being mindful, because a couple of days one day can make a huge difference. Fun fact, my parents got married. My mom wanted to get married on New Year's Eve. And my dad's only stipulation was that the actual marriage was on December 31st, because as long as you're married on the last day of the year, you can file married on your taxes. So even though things were a little bit more expensive because it was a holiday, he was like, we'll let it slide. She's like, I don't know what happened. Your dad just was fine with it as long as it was finalized by midnight. I started becoming an advisor, and I looked at that rule and I looked up at him. I'm like, when's your anniversary again? He's like, it's December 31st. So just a financial advisor all the time. Yeah. Because again, love can be temporary, but being smart should be permanent.
That's right.
I love that.
I love it.
They're still happily married, but I just get a kick out of it. It's like, and both. Why not both?
I don't think the apple fell too far from the tree with you.
I don't think so either. So is there anything we missed? I feel like we had such a good conversation. Is there anything else you'd really want somebody to know as they're navigating purchasing a home?
I think that for anybody that is considering it, first of all, that this should be fun. If it is not fun, maybe real estate is not your jam. Maybe that's not your route. So I think that first and foremost, it should be something you're interested in. It should be something that you, especially if you're not just buying it to put a roof over your head. I think it's funny because I run into a lot of clients who, after going through the process, they've had so much fun. They've looked at so many fun houses. They've had some great stories. We've had some good laughs. And then you get to closing and they get the house, and then it's like, oh, how long do we have to wait to do this again? Because they get it's like house hunting is fun.
Yeah.
Looking at other people's homes is a great time. And I just tell them, okay, just
it's a great time.
I'm like, just become like that weekend open house hunter. Like, you don't have to go buy the house, but you can go walk in, right? But it's a true thing. Like, people go through the process and they find out that they really like it, and they're like, oh, it's sad that we can't be continuing to do this. So I think that first of all, it should always be fun. It should be something that you're interested in, especially if it's for investment purposes. If it's not just to, have a place to cook your dinner at home. There's so many different avenues of real estate. And so even if you're not looking to, buy a house, turn it into a rental in a couple years, or if you're not even looking at just buying an investment property to become a landlord, there are other ways to invest in real estate. And I'm sure you have some great avenues to that for people who want to be in some sort of real estate vehicle, but don't necessarily want to be taking the call on the weekend about the plumbing issues. Everybody loves real estate, but do they really love real estate? That would be kind of like the question that I would ask. And do you have enough people in your life where you can have a good team? I think with anything that you decide that you're going to set out to do you have the right team members in your life that can make that investment or that journey more palatable? If you're new to the area and you're not social and you don't have any friends that could potentially help you put in that water heater on the weekend, maybe it's not for you. But I think that
Or go find somebody.
Go find some, right? Go find some. Build that network, build that team, build that circle of friends, because I think when you can, my dad has always told me, Michaela, any job is easy when you have the right tool.
It's a good one.
That's my 83-year-old dad who still likes to get on top of the roof and winterize his swamp cooler on his own. You have the right tools, you have the right people in your life, and these kinds of things, become more than just a topic of conversation.
And my dad told me to get married on New Year's Eve. And we're all getting some very useful advice from our dads. Well, I, for one, am happy that you're on my team. And we've been friends for a long time. And I just so respect all the work that you do. And I'm so grateful that you came on the podcast today to talk to everybody. I know it's going to help some people. So thank you for that.
Taylor, you're one of my favorite persons in the whole world. And I love every interaction that we get. And I learned so much from you. I mean, every time we have, even if it's a fun conversation, I always learn so much. And so anybody that has the honor of you being in their corner to me has invaluable, wise and sage advice coming their way.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. You're one of my favorite persons too. It's important to have that big network of people that you talked about. But I think especially having women who just are out in the world just kicking what. I mean, it's just, you're one of those women to me. So it's great to have friends. It's even better to have friends that you respect and you admire as much as I respect and admire you. So where can people find you so you can become their realtor / lifelong friend?
Yes.
Where can they find you?
I love that. Well, first of all, you could find me at any Safety Harbor Third Friday. That's probably my favorite place to meet because it's fun and there's always a little bit of sangria involved too. But
this town is magical.
Yeah.
Like, can you believe there's a podcast studio like this in the middle of downtown? I've driven by it a million times.
I live a block away from here, and this is like my backyard, I'm absolutely loving it.
Yeah, this town has endless possibilities. And you see Michaela's picture everywhere because she's modest, but she is the premier realtor of Safety Harbor. So anyways, where can they find you?
Yep. So you can find me at blakerealestate.com and then also michaelamorenz.com. And of course, I don't know if you're putting email addresses or phone numbers out there, but I also really welcome a text message. I'm always happy to connect that way as well. But michaelamorenz.com, blakerealestate.com.
Well, thank you so much again. And thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, remember, wealth suits you better when it's tailored. Good job.
I love it.
Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through MFP Financial Services, LLC, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Michaela Morenz and her company are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or MFP Financial Services, LLC.